Good day, everyone. Again, this is Charmaine for ClintChamSpeaks, the headlines. And for today's latest news, it's coming from Gulf News, entitled COVID-19. UAE residents no longer need entry permit to return. Expats stranded abroad to be approved automatically as of Wednesday. This was published August 12, 2020 at 2:08 in the afternoon by Kitam Al-Amir, senior staff writer. Abu Dhabi. Expatriate residents stranded abroad who wish to return to the UAE will no longer need to apply for a resident entry permit from Wednesday. The move was announced on Tuesday by the National Emergency and Crisis Management Authority and the Federal Authority for Identity and Citizenship as part of the second phase of the return of expatriate residents to the UAE. The two entities approved the second phase to coincide with the end of summer holidays for educational institutions and resumption of business activities and social and service facilities in the country amid the easing of coronavirus restrictions. To facilitate the return, the Federal Authority for Identity will automatically grant pre-approval for expatriate residents wishing to return without the need to apply for an entry permit. The authority advised them to update their personal data, ID number, and passport number. It noted that the data update is optional for those wishing to verify the authenticity of their data and travel documents. Expatriate residents must submit a negative COVID-19 PCR test before flying. Airlines need to ensure that all passengers have the negative PCR result issued by the accredited centers not more than 96 hours prior to arrival in the UAE. All precautionary and preventive measures will be applied to all residents upon arrival in the country in accordance with health and preventive protocols in place, including laboratory tests and home quarantine in compliance with the prescribed measures to ensure their health and safety. On Monday, the Federal Authority for Identity and Citizenship issued a decision extending the deadline for holders of expired entry permits and visas from August 11 for 1 month to enable them to leave the country and exempt them from fines. The authority's decision is part of the national initiatives launched by the UAE and is an implementation of the UAE Cabinet's related decisions and regulations of entry and residency of foreigners. The authority urged those eligible to leave the country within the set deadline, which will help facilitate their return to the UAE. COVID-19 UAE visa update. Expired visa holders get another month's grace period. Entry permit and visa holders have a month from August 11 to leave the UAE. This is published last August 11, 2020 by Hoda Tabriz, senior news editor. And for another update coming from ClintChamSpeaks, Philippines Duterte has huge trust in Russian vaccine. Russia's health ministry approves world's first COVID-19 vaccine after less than 2 months of human testing. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has lauded Russia's efforts to develop a coronavirus vaccine and is willing to participate in trials as he welcomed a supply offer from Moscow that he expects will be free of charge. Russia's health ministry has given regulatory approval for the world's first COVID-19 vaccine developed by Moscow's Gamaleya Institute after less than 2 months of human testing, President Vladimir Putin said on Tuesday. The Philippines has among Asia's highest numbers of coronavirus infections, which rose to 136,638 on Monday after a record daily jump of 6,958 cases. I will tell President Vladimir Putin that I have huge trust in your studies in combating COVID and I believe that the vaccine that you have produced is really good for humanity, Duterte said on television late Monday. The frenetic global race to develop a COVID-19 vaccine has raised concern that speed and national prestige could compromise safety. To allay public fears, Duterte offered to be a guinea pig when the vaccine arrives and said, "I can be the first they can experiment on." His office on Tuesday said the Philippines stands really ready to work with Russia on vaccine trials, supply, and production. In July, Duterte made a plea to his Chinese counterpart to make the Philippines a priority if it develops a vaccine, amid concern in developing countries about availability. He this month restored a strict lockdown in and around the capital Manila for an initial 2 weeks, heeding the plea of medical frontliners for a timeout amid a surge in infections during a period when restrictions were eased. If the situation becomes a runaway contagion, Duterte on Monday vowed to mobilize the military to enforce the lockdown. The lockdown has been among the world's toughest, and Duterte's opponents and rights groups have voiced concern about his security-centered approach and the conduct of police. And that's the update from ClintChamps. The last but not the least is an update from The National. For heartbroken Lebanese, Dubai is the new Beirut. The blast has sent more Lebanese to seek a new life abroad, and many head to the city inspired by Beirut, Dubai. Just days after the enormous blast that shattered Beirut, Ali Hamoud found himself looking down on the rubble from a plane window, leaving behind his family and hometown. Born and raised in Lebanon's capital, the 30-year-old IT engineer finally decided to head for Dubai after the explosion destroyed his last hopes of ever seeing Beirut prosper. It's not easy at all, but I had to finally leave. I feel I've betrayed the city I love to death, but there is nothing left for me there except depression, Mr. Hamoud told AFP after arriving in the Emirate. Now I can start a professional career, live in peace and send money back to my family, said Mr. Hamoud, who had spent a year looking in vain for work before the August 4 disaster that left more than 170 people dead and compounded Lebanon's financial crisis. Like many of his compatriots longing for safety and stability, the young man has applied for a job in Dubai. He joins tens of thousands of Lebanese who helped build a glitzy city that reminds them of their parents' tales of the glamour of old Beirut, but with glimmering skyscrapers instead of Ottoman-era and French colonial villas. Last week's explosion of a long-neglected stock of ammonium nitrate at Beirut's port ripped through the vibrant coastal city known for its rich history, as well as legendary nightlife and cuisine. The fact that Lebanese officials had long tolerated a ticking time bomb in the heart of the Mediterranean city has served as proof to many of the rot at the core of the state apparatus. My aim now is to quickly overcome the guilt of leaving, said Mr. Mahmoud. Dubai will be my new Beirut. Long before the explosion, Lebanon was heading downhill fast. The country was mired in its worst economic crisis since the 1975 or 1990 civil war, with runaway inflation and bank capital controls fueling poverty, despair, and angry street protests. Political life in the multi-confessional country has been dominated for 3 decades by former warlords who exchanged their military fatigues for suits. Among Sunni Muslim, Christian, and myriad other groups, the most powerful force is the Shiite Hezbollah movement. After years of systemic corruption, unsolved assassination cases, wars with neighboring Israel, and lack of basic services, many Lebanese now see the country's elite as fighting over the spoils. They are viewed as beholden to their personal and sectarian interests rather than the good of the nation of 6 million. I can explain how frustrated I am. I had to leave my country years ago because of those warlords. They stole from us and now they kill us, said Firas Rashid, a 31-year-old salesman who has lived in Dubai since 2016. Beirut, once famous for top educational and medical establishments, has lost much of its pre-Civil War identity, its reputation as an oasis of enlightenment, and for its joie de vivre. Millions of Lebanese, from doctors to engineers to teachers and other professions, have emigrated over the years, seeking a better life in the Gulf and beyond. Some hundreds of thousands of Lebanese now live and work in the 6 Gulf nations, more than 300,000 of them in the United Arab Emirates alone, mostly in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. Why Dubai? We drive in lanes here. We don't fear militiamen holding guns to our heads. We have basic services and we get paid well, said Mr. Rashid. My parents always described Beirut as a hub for the region in the 60s and 70s, but this is exactly what Dubai is now. In his book, My Story, Dubai's ruler Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum recalls his first visit to Beirut years before the civil war that brought the Paris of the Middle East to its knees. In the early 1960s, its streets were clean, neighborhoods beautiful, its markets modern. It was a source of inspiration for me. I had a dream for Dubai to become like Beirut someday, he wrote. Decades later, Dubai has become a magnet for millions of Arabs whose countries have been ravaged by poverty and conflict. Jordanians, Palestinians, Moroccans, and others have opted to instead build a future in the desert city. It does not have the history or cultural heritage of their homelands, but for many, it is a fair trade-off for peace and financial security. At a basketball game in Dubai last year between two Lebanese clubs with different sectarian ties, there was no evidence or there was no violence, no sectarian chants, only the slogan, 3, 2, 1, we are one. And that's for the news for today. Again, this is Charmaine. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for more in ClintChamSpeaks, the headlines.